Welcome, residents, to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is not producer Richard, but each week he talks about the weird and wonderful world of DC while fielding questions from listeners like you. And across from me this week, across the airwaves, across the country, is the doctor himself. Doc, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful, even though I just completely fumbled the order of the intro.
I like it. You know what? It's time to change it up. You know, we're 5.5 years in. Throw out the rule book.
Yeah, the hierarchy of power of the intro is changing.
Holy shit! Yeah. There you go.
There we go. All right. So Doc, I mean, it's 2 weeks in a row now. Are we? What's new in your world? I mean, last week we talked about what you were reading. This week we talked about we talked a little bit about what I was reading.
Yeah. God, what's new? Jeez Louise. Well, I mean, yesterday from the day of recording, 2 days ago while you're listening, it was my birthday. So I just had
happy birthday.
I loaded up on wings and pizza, and I got some new comics, some trades and stuff like that. So that's pretty much all I need for a birthday. So that was nice. That felt good. I'm trying to migrate Twitter over to Hive.
Yes. So for those of us that are not big on the social medias and don't know much about us, what is Hive? Explain Hive to the people.
Hive is it works like Twitter. In your bio page looks like Twitter, but you can just write little short things, or you can put a picture up and write stuff. But it feels more like Instagram because there's no character limits, and it can present your stuff in like grid format. You can do the MySpace style, like have a song play when people visit your profile, which is awesome. It's cool, but like the people that run it are like strictly like anti-hate and all this sort of stuff. But the crazy thing is that it was like a very like niche small thing. Like there's 2 people that run Hive. That's it. And a couple of days ago, all of Star Wars Twitter and all of comic book Twitter were like, Hive it is. Because no one can figure out Mastodon. And so everyone went over to Hive. And so these people, it's a little slow, it's a little buggy. There's some functionality things that they're ironing out. Like, if you use a capital letter in your hashtag, it breaks the hashtag right now. There's like little things like that. But they're like a small team. 1 million people just joined them in 2 days. They're working it out, but they seem like they have a completely opposite ethos to the way Twitter has and is currently being run. So I'm all for that.
Fantastic. So it's basically like a new social media platform at the center of an infinite number of people just flooding it all at once.
Wait a minute. I see what you're doing. I see what's happening here.
It's almost like I spent your entire spiel trying to come up with a segue into this week's topic, Infinite Crisis.
Oh, holy shit. You said that you were going to get good at this one day. I think it happened. That was it. That was the moment.
That was my retcon punch.
That was your, to use a Marvel reference, that was your Steve Rogers jumping on the grenade. You're like, no, it actually is him. He's the super soldier. Yeah.
So yeah, Infinite Crisis.
Yeah, this was the theme voted on by our Golden Age patrons. Some of our episodes are coming out slightly out of order, so we're doing it this week. But yeah, Infinite Crisis. It's the 20-year anniversary sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed the multiverse and made one Earth, one timeline. Infinite Crisis sort of opened the door to bring the multiverse back, basically. Huge event, massive event, that took a couple of years to lead up to, or a year or so to lead up to. Huge event. You just reread it for this.
I did. I just I went and picked it off the shelf last night and have burned through it over the last 24 hours in every ounce of spare time I have and finished it just in the last hour. And I I made some notes as I went through it, the things that really
Sure.
jumped out at me. Uh, so the first thing, one is the whole premise of the book is Superman from Earth 2, the Golden Age Superman, has been hanging out in this heaven, for lack of a better word, since Crisis on Infinite Earths, and looks down at this Earth that has been working over the last 20 years and sees all of the heroes have become angry. And it's just a
Yeah.
darker, unhappier place.
Yeah, I mean the whole event's sort of they see, like Superman died, Batman had his back broken, Green Arrow died, Wonder Woman lost her power. Like everyone had sort of that thing. It's commenting on that whole piece, yeah.
Yeah. And so as I'm the first thing that I'm noticing, keeping all that in mind as I'm going through the book, is the art feels angry. Like
Sure.
the depictions of the characters, they look just mad and angry all the time. They look
Yeah,
darker and more just emo, angsty.
yeah.
I don't know what the word is there, but I feel like it did a really good job of conveying that darker world through the art.
Totally. Yeah, and not only is it the original Earth 2 Golden Age Superman, Kal-El, just L,
Yep.
but it's also his Lois. It's the Earth 3 Alexander Luthor Jr., and it's Superboy Prime from the old Prime Earth. And that happens at the end of Crisis. Those characters retreat to like a paradise dimension just
Yep.
outside the one remaining Earth. And so we kind of pick up with like, oh yeah, them. What have they been up to?
Just, pulling a Truman story and
Yeah,
watching everybody.
yeah, and then the basic premise of the event is that Alexander Luthor Jr. Believes and convinces everyone else to believe that when they saved, one Earth, when they built an entire history on one Earth, they picked the wrong one. They picked the wrong Earth to build history on, and that's why everything's so dark and why people are angry and stuff like that, and all these bad things that happen all the time. And so they kind of hatch this he hatches an extremely elaborate, extremely destructive plan that has a lot of different tendrils, to essentially try to undo the crisis, to bring the infinite Earths back. He kind of half succeeds, and then they all collapse, and it alters the history of New Earth. And then, kind of after Infinite Crisis, you discover that the multiverse actually did come back, and that's the first time that you have a sort of finite multiverse where there's only 52 worlds. I mean, a lot more happens in the story than that, but that's the basic kind of parentheses of Infinite Crisis.
Yeah. Uh, there was one scene that, like, as I was reading through this, I audibly cheered.
Okay.
And the one thing that came to mind was like, you don't fuck with crypto. Because that
Yes.
moment that Superboy Prime kicks crypto and Connor just goes full blast straight into him, it's like, no, that's my dog. You don't touch my dog.
Yeah, totally.
It's like, okay.
And,
Okay.
and for people that read through Death Metal, there's a sort of redemption in general for Superboy Prime in Death Metal, but there's also kind of a redemption of his relationship to Crypto. When you consider that happens in Infinite Crisis, and then if you read, I think it's called The Secret Origin, is the one shot that features Superboy Prime during Death Metal. It's kind of all about him and Crypto in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, the last thing that jumped out at me, Black Adam and Psycho Pirate, there at the very end.
Oh yeah.
Like, DC is known for separating bodies, like taking limbs off of bodies, tearing them in two, removing heads. Like, they're known for not really sugarcoating dismemberment. But what he does to Psycho Pirate is on another level.
Yeah, because Psycho Pirate wears the Medusa mask, and Black Adam puts his fingers in the eyes and then pushes the entire mask through the back of his skull. That's a pretty gruesome thing. I mean, this whole event, because so much of it is about the darkness or the dark leaning of the universe and of comics. There's a meta commentary and all of that kind of stuff. There is a lot of like really like horrific violence. That happens to Psycho Pirate. He gets his head exploded. He's not the only person to get his head exploded in this story.
No.
Superboy Prime like fully turns Pantha's head into dust, kind of by accident, as part of his sort of descent into villainy.
And then just rampages through the rest of that team, tearing them to pieces.
Oh, and beating the shit out of Connor and fighting both the Supermen and fighting the Flashes, and like Superboy Prime is like the menace of all menaces in this in this story. Now, was this the first time that you read it, or had you read it before?
No, I have read it a bunch of times before. There for a while, I've revisited the main crises every year or so. Just
oh wow,
yeah, just it's something to read. They were some of the first collected editions that I ever got. Like, I've got the collected graphic novel softback, and I would read through them every year or two just for fun.
Right.
I liked the evolution of the universe at that point, and going from Crisis on Infinite Earth to Infinite Crisis through to Flashpoint at that time.
Yeah.
And just seeing how the universe changes and what they do to readjust and start over. I don't know. I enjoyed doing that. I get that that's a bit of a masochistic thing to do, but there's a lot of self-punishment involved.
I'll say maybe next to Blackest Night, this is probably the event that I read the most.
Yeah.
I've revisited it a lot. And I mean that both in terms of the main event and also there's a bunch of, we'll talk about it because, there's we got lots of questions in that, but there's like a bunch of tie-in, like lead up events. There were 4 concurrent lead up events that like were part of the countdown to Infinite Crisis, and I read a few of those quite often, but I read the main Infinite Crisis a lot. I mean, I read Blackest Night every year for sure. I've probably read Infinite Crisis in general. I've probably read it like 15 times, 16 times. It's one I love. I really, really like this event. I think it really works, especially considering how massive it is. It's like weirdly, it kind of like it's cohesive. Like as much as a comic book premise can make sense, this one makes sense. And even though there's like basically 5 events are one event, like this, it all is pretty cohesive. It's pretty tightly done. It's sort of surprising, actually, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, you hit it on the head. We got a bunch of questions. So with that, let's jump into them. Let's start off at the Facebook.
Go to the face in the book. Go to the Facebook.
First question comes from Alex Bent. What's the over-under on how much the Doc will talk about Day of Vengeance?
I have brought it up once or twice. So I mentioned how there were kind of lead up events, lead up miniseries. Essentially, there's kind of like 4 kind of corner. What happens is there's Countdown to Infinite Crisis is an 80-page one-shot that sort of sets up these 4 things that are about to happen. And the 4 things are OMAC Project, which is about these OMAC robots that are kind of programmed to seek out and neutralize metahumans. Think the Sentinels from X-Men, essentially. There's Rand Thanagar War, which sees it's either the planet Rand or the planet Thanagar transposed into the other solar system, and it kicks off a war, and it features the Hawks and Adam Strange and a bunch of characters. There's Villains United, which is all about the secret society of supervillains. And then there is Day of Vengeance, which is about a Spectre without a human host, gets seduced by Eclipso, currently possessing Jean Loring, the Atom's ex-wife, who was revealed as the killer of Sue Dibney in Identity Crisis, is seduced by Eclipso into attempting to destroy all of magic. Now, all of these four things eventually converge again in Infinite Crisis, but Day of Vengeance itself is basically the Spectre is on this rampage. He's trying to destroy magic. He goes after Dr. Fate and Phantom Stranger and Madame Xanadu first because they're like the most powerful ones that could stop him. He destroys Atlantis. He fights a bunch of wizards in the woods and like kills a bunch. And basically a bunch of like magical C-listers come together as the Shadow Pact to fight him. And that team is Nightmaster, Jim Rook, it's Detective Chimp, it's Nightshade, it's Blue Devil, it's Black Alice, and
Enchantress was Enchantress on that team.
Enchantress is in there too. Ragman. They come together as an unlikely group to fight the Spectre and to try and end him. They have a couple of close calls, and ultimately, in that story, what ends up happening is Naboo, who's all that's left of Dr. Fate, says, we have to let him kill the rest of us. He thinks he's destroying magic. He's actually just destroying the rules that govern magic. He can't destroy magic. Let him do that, and it'll be such a cataclysm that God will notice. It's essentially like God leaves the oven on and walks away for a bit, and they need to let something burn so that God goes, fuck, 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 and kind of comes back and fixes it. And God does. He comes back and he jams the Spectre binds it with the soul of Crispus Allen, a sort of fallen GCPD detective from the Gotham Central series. I love Day of Vengeance. I've talked about it so much on this show. I like the weird magic sorcery side. I love the team of misfits. I love like the high concept stuff about how magic works and its rules. There's some really cool Captain Marvel shit in there. And about them fueling magic into him. And there's this giant kind of like kaiju fight between a giant Captain Marvel and a giant Spectre. It's a great series. I love it so much. So yeah, if you took I don't know which, yeah, of course I'm going to talk about it. I talked about it right up top. So I hope you all placed your bets before the episode.
All right. Next question from Braden Ketty. Was Alexander Luthor right to leave the Joker out of his plans, or was it just a catch-22 situation?
Yeah, we talked about this not too long ago in October when we were talking about kind of villain team-ups and stuff like that. So part of the reveal in Infinite Crisis is that the Luthor at the head of the secret society is not our Luthor. It's Alexander Luthor Jr., and he's manipulating them to capture the villains and heroes he needs to recreate the multiverse and stuff and keep the heroes occupied and shit like that. But that Luthor leaves the Joker out. He doesn't invite him to the secret society. Everyone's invited to the secret society. He doesn't invite the Joker. And at the end of Infinite Crisis, our Luthor finds him kind of like in an alley and says like, you fucked up. You didn't invite the Joker. And he kind of steps aside and Joker shows up and like shoots him in the head and kills him. So the question is, would it actually have been better for him to invite the Joker? Was he on the right path? And it's just the fact that he lost in the crisis that leads to his death, or would the Joker have gotten him eventually anyway? What are your thoughts, Josh?
So Alexander Luthor's whole goal was to create the perfect Earth, right? You know, and the Joker, even if he had involved the Joker from the beginning, I don't know that the Joker would have gone through with any of it or let him go through with it at the end, because the perfect Earth, there's not going to be chaos. There's not going to be this constant dichotomy between good and evil and that eternal struggle, which is where the Joker thrives. Yeah, I just don't see him I mean, it's like Dark Crisis,
yeah.
or Dark Knights, or Dark Crisis, where not Dark Crisis, Dark Knights, uh, or Metal, where Batman Who Laughs, like Joker teams up with Batman. It was like, no, no, no. What this guy is trying to do is on a different level is going to take away all my fun.
Yeah, it's interesting because they talk about the perfect Earth a lot in this event, but I don't think there's any version where they were going to make an Earth that didn't have villains. But I do think that if they made the more perfect one, they'd have a Joker, a version of a Joker that wasn't the one that killed Jason Todd. It wasn't that Joker. It wouldn't be his world, his way. You know what I mean? And so there is probably a part of him that would have sabotaged it at some point anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's the thing: it's just a liability not to include him. It's a liability to include him, but like he didn't show up through Infinite Crisis. He only gets in at the end in a way that kind of justifies Alexander Luthor's position. Because if he was in there and included, he'd have a more active role probably in fucking it up. But like he very clearly is not part of it through the event. I don't know. I got a hot take here. I'm gonna say he actually made the right move. It's just that he lost.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very good point.
I think the Joker's he's too hard to work with, right? I think there's like a way to use him or to unleash him or whatever, but Alexander Luthor's plan was too like precise. It wasn't really a plan that involved a ton of sowing chaos. I mean, technically having the Secret Society fight the heroes, the Battle of Metropolis thing kind of is that. But that's late in the game stuff too, you know? Everything else was like pretty coordinated and stuff like that. I don't think the Joker's good for that.
No, agreed. All right, so next question from Truth, Justice, and Hope, a Superman podcast. As part of its effort to soft reboot DC's continuity into something that incorporated discarded elements of the pre-crisis timeline, a good part of Infinite Crisis and its tie-ins involves killing off or mutilating characters from the late 80s and 90s. Given that Superboy Prime's meta-narrative was that he's an entitled fanboy who can destroy whatever he doesn't like, do you think the use of the character is at least somewhat hypocritical?
Well, no, I don't think it's hypocritical at all. I think that's part of the metaphor, that, Superboy Prime's thing is, and this is from the original Crisis. Originally, Earth Prime was meant to be our world. It's, when you hear Prime Earth now, they're talking about Earth Zero. They're talking about main continuity. But back then, Earth Prime, in that order, referred to our world, which now is Earth 33, and they're different. But Earth Prime was supposed to be the real world. Superboy Prime was meant to be a regular kid on our Earth named Clark Kent, who turned out an asteroid passes by and grants him the powers of Superman, and then he's pulled into the Crisis. But he's meant to be like, whether or not it's literally our world anymore, he's meant to be like real. And his whole thing in Infinite Crisis is that he's been looking at the world from this paradise dimension, which theoretically is no different than reading it in a comic, watching it in a movie. And so he does kind of have this, as a kid who grew up reading comics and then becoming part of the story, he does have this like over investment in the story. And he's like, no, this isn't how it's supposed to be. I hate this, blah, 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 blah. I'm just trying to make you the way you're supposed to be, all that kind of thing. It's a very thin, like not exactly nuanced metaphor for that kind of fanboy sort of thing. To have him like deliberately fighting, the Titans in general, but like he kills Panther, like a very kind of like late 80s, early 90s kind of character. Connor Kent, very 90s character. To have all of those elements in there it's not an accident, but I also don't think it's hypocritical. I think it's the point. If the point was that he was pining for a world that they lost in the Crisis, the original one, then it would make sense for him to kind of have this grudge against these characters that only existed in this kind of new Earth, that only existed on this sort of like what he believes to be a corrupted or a bad version of the world, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. What's your take on Superboy Prime? I think he's a kind of divisive character because even though he is a pretty clear metaphor, I think some people maybe take gripes that he's like a lazy metaphor, or that he's like maybe not a great character in and of himself beyond being this sort of like allegory for fanboys.
Well, I know the first couple times I read anything with him in it, I thought he was a lazy character, but not in that sense. I thought he was a lazy character, just that he was way too easily overpowered. Like he was this, like, he was always the one that he was their trump card every time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, so here's a character that's just supremely powerful that can go toe to toe with Superman, that can go toe to toe with the biggest, the best, the baddest, and good luck trying to stop him. I mean, the Flashes couldn't even contain him.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like the first couple times I read him, I thought he was lazy in that sense. But then as I matured and got older and different perspective, really it wasn't until Multiversity that I really appreciated Superboy Prime as a character in the meta sense. Because, I mean, Superboy Prime, there's an argument that could be made that Superboy Prime is the same villain as is the through villain throughout Multiversity, and it's the Reader.
Oh,
it's the
right,
one who,
yeah, like the empty hand kind of thing.
Yeah, that meta narrative of we as the reader give the comics power, and we're the ones that by turning the page create the escalation of catastrophe because we demand more. But at the same time, we not only demand more, we also want just this ideal world that we used to have, the golden age. Like when things were simple, when things were happy, when things were easy. And so giving that meta narrative, the reader, the villain, a face and a name and a costume, but then turning it on its head. And we're not just going to give it a costume, but we're going to put the epitome of superhero-dom as its symbol. I don't know. It grows on you, or it grew on me, and I appreciate Superboy Prime for what he is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. You know, like I think the people that yell the loudest or maybe have the most of these kind of like, this is wrong, there's a right way and a wrong way kind of opinions about these things are the people that are like, I love Superman. Like and that's not to detract from their love for Superman, but I do think it's the ownership piece, because a lot of Superboy Prime stuff is like, I sacrificed my life and my world for this, like I should be Superboy, you're the wrong Superboy, it should be me, you know. And he's speaking about it in a way that like doesn't make sense if we said like I should be Superboy, but it does track in terms of like that feeling of ownership and of like betrayal when the story doesn't go where you want it to go, or things like that. I think Superboy Prime is probably, to me, I think he's more lazily used between Infinite Crisis and other things. You know, like him and Sinestro Core Wards, like he's kind of just there to be a powerhouse. Like I never really bought into him buying in with Sinestro. Like there's a few kind of places where they stuck him that I never really bought into. But I think he works in Infinite Crisis really well. And I think he works in I think he works really well in Death Metal, like crazy well. Some of the interim stuff, you know, I think it's hit or miss, and sometimes that's even like page to page. But no, I mean in general, I think he's a strong concept. I just don't know that everyone or every interpretation of him got it right, you know.
Oh, for sure. And wasn't there was a story, was it near the end of Doomsday Clock or the one where Jor-El comes back? But there was a teaser scene at the end of one of those stories where we see Superboy Prime's cell open.
Yeah, that
And
might have
there's
been
this
at the
teaser.
end of the Jor-El Mr. Oz thing. And then he
Yeah.
did show up in the John's Shazam series that was like constantly delayed. I think he showed up in there. And then ultimately, like he's kind of sacrifices himself during death metal. And he kind of gets his wish. He gets
Yeah.
back to his world and his story and everything.
Yeah. Well, that does it for Facebook. So now we're going over to Twitter.
Touch Twitter.
First question is from Kyle. Where does this fall on your DC event tier list?
Ooh. How about you? Where would you put this for you in DC events?
Oh,
I mean,
that's
I
a hard
guess
question.
events is slightly broader than just
It is.
crises.
Yes. It would fall probably in the top 5 or 6
Yeah.
for sure. It's I don't know that it would be top 3. Somewhere in that 4, 5 to 6 range.
Interesting. I mean, if we're just talking Infinite Crisis, not everything that leads up or whatever.
Right.
I think I would put it top 5. It might make my top 3.
Interesting.
It might be like what would my top 3 be then? I'm trying to work through it. Blackest Night and Infinite Crisis, I guess, and then Crisis, like the first one, and then right under that, I'm putting like Day of Vengeance.
Yeah.
I mean, Forever Evil is up there on events for me, for like just general events, not necessarily crisis things. Forever Evil's way up there. Like that's a really solid event too. I mean that might be my top 5, not in any particular order, but kind of like Blackest Night, Infinite Crisis, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Day of Vengeance, Forever Evil.
And see, I think again, I don't know that I could order these specifically, but Blackest Night's in my top 3 for sure.
Yeah,
but I think I talked about like that was the book that got me into DC Comics.
Right.
That was the first like DC book I remember reading in college. So it always holds a special place. Same with Flashpoint. Flashpoint is up there for me.
Right.
Forever Evil was the third one that came to mind, and I think I'm. So I mean that puts it out of the top 3 because those are in my top 3.
Sure.
And I've got. I really enjoy Doomsday Clock, and so that's up
Doomsday
there. Doomsday
Clock is huge. Oh fuck! I left Doomsday Clock out. Shit.
And
yeah. I don't know that it cracks my 5, but it's up there. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, I think Infinite Crisis for me is in that 4, 5, or 6 range with like Doomsday Clock and maybe in Original Crisis.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough because especially when you expand it to events. I mean, there's some real stinkers. Like do we count like War for Earth 3? Like that's an event that had like a one shot, but was sort of just across other titles. It wasn't like its own book or anything. But like that's a extremely weak one. I kind of hesitate to even call it an event. I mean, it is, but there's a podcast called DCOCD. I actually guested on an episode of it, but they would go through and they would just do only the events. Every episode was just a different DC event. And it was like a ton of episodes because you get like stuff that was just those kind of crossovers across things. And then you get like the episode I did was Justice League versus Suicide Squad from the Rebirth era. Stuff like that. But I mean, there's a ton of events. I still think even with that broad category and not just talking about crises, Infinite Crisis is way up there for me. I truly, I can't sing its praises, I think, highly enough. I love this book. I've always loved it from the first time I read it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
At least by the standard of an event comic, but also just generally. I just really like it.
Sure. Right. Next question from our favorite religious representative.
Ooh, Chris Chan.
Is this the first instance of Dan DiDio trying to kill off Dick?
Right. There's this sort of like, it's not really a rumor, it's like relatively true that like Dan DiDio was sort of looking to off Dick Grayson. And the part of the plan for Infinite Crisis was for that to be like the linchpin kind of moment, the real emotional core loss moment of this crisis would be the death of Nightwing, the death of Dick Grayson. There's a lot of talk about him through the book. When the Earth 2 Superman comes to visit New Earth Batman, and he says, we're going to make a better world. It's going to be better for all of us. And the only counter that Batman has for him is Dick better on your world? Was he a better man on your world than he was on mine? And Superman, like Kal-El, kind of has to just go like, no, he's always good. And so that's kind of Batman's argument for like, who are you to say which Earth is meant to be better? If there's hope, if there's good on this world, then yeah, maybe we have a rougher road, but like we can get there. It's a very interesting kind of hopeful Batman moment that I enjoy. But yeah, I mean, part of the reason that all of those seeds are sown is because the plan was that Superboy Prime or someone would kill Dick Grayson. They ultimately changed that because people would hate that. And I actually don't think it works as well. But they changed that, and Connor dies. Con-El, Superboy Prime kills Superboy, which I think works better in a number of ways, but it's also maybe slightly less rage-inducing as killing Dick.
I mean, for real, look, kill Superman, okay, kill Batman, okay. You've killed every Flash, you've killed Wonder Woman. Don't kill Dick Grayson. Like, that's just one of those things.
Do you see how angry we all got at Rick Grayson? You don't touch Dick Grayson.
I think I've just like rage blocked that out of my memory.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not the last time that they kind of tease or flirt with the idea of killing Dick. Forever Evil is another time we come back to like, is Dick going to be the one that bites it here? And we even go so far as to kind of like, he technically dies a bit, and then Lex brings him back, and then they keep him dead. They fake his death so that he can join Spiral and stuff like that.
Like, as that was coming out, that was the end of a book. That was the end of one of the books. And so it was a month before I'm like, wait, hold on. Did we really just do that?
Yeah.
And but they ended up making up for it by giving us one of the best Dick Grayson stories in recent memory coming out of that. So it is.
I mean, listen, that Grayson book has no business being that good. It's a truly great book. But again, that's another version of like, oh, did we kill Dick this time? Kind of, it's not until lately, and obviously Dark Crisis, where it's like, we know they're not going to kill Dick, but he also finally gets a real central role in an event. He's really taking, him and John. It's the whole point of Dark Crisis, obviously. I'm saying stuff as if it's like novel. It's the whole point of the book. But they're like the legacy characters are really like stepping into their own. It's not just when things are good they get to go off and hero. It's that they're the clutch event when the reality's in danger. You can count on these people, and so it's the first time I think in a while that Dick has been like a major part of a story where you don't have to go like, are they going to try to you don't really have to worry about him.
All right, so next question from Emmanuel_Nick. Was the presence around at the time of the crisis? Could he have stopped the crisis on Infinite Earths?
Well, if we're talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths, I mean, the presence is there. I mean, if anything, he's probably the one that sends the Spectre back to the beginning of time. I mean, I can't remember if he literally does or if it's just implied, but the Spectre fights the Anti-Monitor in the original Crisis. Like at the beginning of time. It's the thing, it's like one of the most comic accurate pieces that they kind of translate and adapt and use in the Arrowverse Crisis, is that Anti-Monitor and the Spectre fight at the beginning of time. That's like a big kind of cosmic fight there. Is the Presence around? Of course he is. He exists, so he's around. Is that the same as being like super engaged? Not really. I mean, we know he's around during Infinite Crisis because eventually he realizes the oven's burning and he comes and gives the Spectre a new human host. Like, he's there, he exists, but we do set up that it's like exceedingly difficult to get his attention, or that he might just not care that much, or that, you know, or that things are always meant to unfold this way, you know, the mysterious ways kind of bullshit. You know, he's definitely there. He never stops existing, but it's the idea of like, is this the way things are supposed to happen, or does he give a shit? Or, you know, there's a bunch of questions that way. Could he stop things? Almost certainly. I think we set the Presence up. Generally, you know, we play into the Christian God, like the Abrahamic God metaphor or symbol of him a lot, especially through the Spectre and Phantom Stranger. But, you know, Morrison's map of the multiverse puts the Presence in the overvoid, like in the Source. So is the Presence just the Source manifesting as the Abrahamic God? Is the Presence above the Source? We also know the Source now is full of like other beings. Is the Presence above them or contained to our multiverse? Like, where the Presence sits, the level of power, it's all very kind of like wishy-washy, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But if we just imagine that it's just a version of the Source, then it's like, that doesn't go anywhere. They're always there. But these things just have to play out. These are like little micro, on the scale of omniversal kind of beings. These little crises, even the big ones, are relatively minor to them. They just come and watch them and then watch them leave. We saw that in Death Metal. The Chronicler shows up and goes, "Yeah, I'm just here to record shit before you blow it all up." And it's just he kind of gets infected by story in that like Final Crisis way, where he's like, "I can't let this go." And he intervenes, which is like super taboo for them, because normally they just go like, check, and they kind of move on. And so we have a lot of comic evidence for that stuff. I can't imagine that the Presence is below that level of caring.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that is it for Twitter. Now we're going to Instagram.
Now we're going to Instagram, take some questions and answer them.
Yeah. First question on Instagram from Multi Sanchez. Aside from bringing Jason Todd back to life, what were the effects of the retcon punch?
So, you may have heard the term retcon punch before. Essentially, like we talked about, where we pick up an Infinite Crisis is with 4 characters where we left them at the end of the first Crisis. So, Earth 2, Kal-El and Lois, Earth 3, Alexander Luthor Jr., and Earth Prime, Superboy Prime. And they're in this paradise dimension. And it's sort of depicted as this sort of crystalline structure, and they can see events out through it and stuff like that, like they've been watching the whole time. And, you know, part of the whisperings Alexander Luthor does is he convinces Superboy Prime that this world is wrong. They need to remake the multiverse, find the right one. And to escape, Superboy Prime punches like the edge of the pocket dimension. Like he punches the wall of reality, and it causes a ripple that affects the reality of New Earth. It like alters little things. It resurrects some members of the Doom Patrol. It brings Jason Todd back to life. It does a few other weird little things that are kind of little continuity, you know, maybe undoes a death, or it like replaces like a thing that happened to someone, a few little things. But it's called the retcon punch because it's literally Superboy Prime punches reality and the ripples change history.
Well, there's even
Yeah.
there's a panel in there that Alexander Luthor is giving Superboy Prime this history lesson of this new Earth that has been created. And
Right.
it's, yeah, Batman is still here. He's still in Gotham, but his parents' killer has been captured. Superman, there are stories and rumors of him from before he ever shows up in Metropolis. And
Yeah, these were all things that like post the first crisis were changes, like there is no Superboy adventures
yeah,
in terms of like teen Clark. And so then, yeah, the Punch has these kind of hints that like, are some of those things back in there now? It's interesting though, because there's actually a few different things that alter continuity in Infinite Crisis. The retcon punch is only one of them. Because the other one is that Luthor makes a multiverse, but it's unstable and it collapses again. But because he had made it briefly, when it all collapses back into New Earth, that also changes history again.
yeah,
And one of the changes that causes is that Wonder Woman is once again a founding member of the Justice League, because post-crisis she isn't. Um, she shows up and the Justice League is founded, and her early adventures with the Justice League are retconned as being Black Canary. Black Canary was a founding member of the Justice League, and Infinite Crisis restores Diana to that position, but it does it through this collapsing multiverse, not through the retcon punch. So there's actually like a couple of different like retcon dynamics in that event. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter which one caused which, but there's a few different ways where they say, and now this is how it happened, and now this over here. Like there's a few different ways that they do that. Yeah.
yeah. So next question from Dim Jingles. What was the biggest change in continuity caused by Infinite Crisis, other than the multiverse coming back? So we just talked about a handful of them. Wonder Woman being reestablished, Jason Todd, all Doom Patrol, these characters coming back to life. We talked about off the top, yeah, the multiverse coming back, but also reestablishing it as not an infinite multiverse, but a multiverse of 52 unique Earths.
Yeah. I mean, the thing though is, Infinite Crisis sets that up. That doesn't happen in Infinite Crisis. We have to explore that in 52 in the weekly series that comes after. I would argue that the Wonder Woman thing is a pretty big one, because that was a pretty big shift post-crisis, to have Wonder Woman's early adventures not be hers anymore. That like Hippolyta was the golden age Wonder Woman, and then she shows up like late. And so Black Canary had kind of taken her position in the early days of the League. Restoring Diana to like a foundation of the Justice League is significant. I think that's probably one of the bigger ones. Obviously the Red Hood thing, like Jason Todd comes back to life. There's the Red Hood thing. That's obviously part of it. But it's Infinite Crisis is also our first hint that Barry isn't dead. There have been kind of fake outs and things like that through the Mark Waid Flash series and stuff like that. At first you thought Barry was back. You learned that it's Thawne. Like there's a whole like thing that happens in that series. But during Infinite Crisis, as multiple Flashes are trying to run Superboy Prime into the Speed Force, Barry comes and helps. It's the first indication that we have that Barry is truly not dead, that he's maybe stuck in the Speed Force or trapped there, or maybe he is dead, but he's sublimated into the Speed Force. But it's the idea that he could come back. It's really the first kind of true hint that we get that he's there and waiting, let's see. We're talking about retcons, I guess, not just like consequences.
No, I mean, changes in biggest change in continuity. So one of the things they talked about, and I'd be interested to hear you kind of break this one down, but one of the things they talked about in that book was, how we were entering the ninth age of magic. And so continuity wise, with Naboo sacrificing himself, the Spectre being put back into a body, the Ninth Age of Magic. Was there a lot of line wide continuity shifts in the magic side of the universe?
I don't know that I ever had an experience of really understanding what it meant. Like, what are the new rules? But it was an opportunity for them to kind of like change stuff up. I mean, it's not like a retcon. It's just consequences of actions. But during Day of Vengeance, the wizard Shazam is killed. The Rock of Eternity explodes. And they put it together. The magical community comes together. They put the Rock of Eternity back together, but someone has to sit in there to hold it together. That was kind of like the wizard Shazam's function. And Captain Marvel ultimately has to do that. So it kind of actually removes him from the board for a bit. Freddie Freeman becomes the new Captain Marvel. Like, there's a sort of reset of how those powers work. There's kind of a reset of how speed powers work. After Infinite Crisis, who has speed, and it affects Jay Garrick. It affects there's a few things that way. The Ninth Age of Magic thing, also, like, I think we get we'd get Hector Hall, Dr. Fate after that, I guess. He'd be the next one to put the helmet on, because then that leads into all the Black Adam stuff. So I guess that would be
with the
that
World
would be
War III.
that would be around then. That'd be the Hector Hall, Dr. Fate. You get a new Dr. Fate. That's not a retcon. It's just a consequence of there needs to be a new Dr. Fate. The helmet gets kind of thrown to wherever it will land, whoever it will choose, sort of thing. The changes in continuity thing, Diana's probably the biggest one. Jason being back from the dead is a big one. There being a multiverse is a big one. There's also just some kind of minor, like who died, who came back. Like, there's a little bit of that kind of stuff. I think those are kind of like the big pieces, at least that stand out to me. If we're not just talking retcons, but just talking like what's big stuff that Infinite Crisis did, you get the new Blue Beetle, you get Jaime Reyes. Like, it's a huge part of it. You have the Trinity basically like take a year off at the end. They go like, man, this fucked us up, and they just leave. And 52, the original concept of 52 is like, what about a year without the Trinity? It sort of morphs and becomes its own thing, but that becomes part of it.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at consequences, that's the answer. It's 52. That whole series was, quote unquote, exploring the consequences of Infinite Crisis.
Totally. And even like, Ralph and trying to bring Sue back, that cult of resurrection that Cassie Sandsmark is kind of like part of, trying to bring Connor back. Like, there's a lot of, yes, you're right. I think that's those are kind of like the big ones that stand out. I'm sure there's something I'm missing, but obviously Superboy Prime just being in the world and a threat that has to be managed. There's that kind of iconic panel of like he's in a Green Lantern science cell in a red sun, surrounded by like 100 Green Lanterns, and that's just like how he's in prison. He's just there. And he comes back out during Sinestro Corps War. Like, he's part of the fabric of it now. So he's a pretty big contribution in general.
That could be another really good answer. Now that we have the introduction of a new cosmic level threat.
Yeah, totally.
We can always just kind of pull out whenever we can always dredge him back up and use him whenever we want.
Totally.
All right, so speaking of, next question, Robbie's just this guy. Superboy Prime broke out of the Speed Force. How'd he do that? Is he faster than most speedsters?
I mean, he is extremely fast. So Superboy Prime's power level is like, you think of like what could Superman do pre-crisis? You know, the Silver Age Superman. Like, what could he do? This is the guy that would like drag like a chain of planets like through space and shit like that. Superboy Prime kind of has sort of that level of power. He also, though, he also wears this armor. If you see Superboy Prime early in Infinite Crisis, he's basically just wearing a Superboy costume, Superman costume.
Yeah.
But he ends up wearing this armor, and the armor is the Anti-Monitor's armor, and it's feeding energy into him. It's supercharging him and making him even more powerful, even faster, even stronger. That's how he's able to fight two Supermen at the same time. They fly him through a red sun and he still fights them. Like he does, the speedsters run him into the Speed Force and he escapes.
So that's it. When they run him into the Speed Force, that is where he creates the armor. And he uses that armor to siphon yellow energy because they trap him under a red sun. And so he builds this armor to basically feed solar energy to his body so he can escape. And according to him, he had been trapped there for years.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think the Speed Force is a Wally era creation. That wasn't like a thing when Barry was the Flash. And I do think there's like this kind of spiritual, and there's sort of like always been an evolving understanding of what the Speed Force is. And it's partly like sentient, and it's partly just energy, and it's partly a place, and it's partly an afterlife. It's like a little bit of all of it. The way that it's described in Infinite Crisis makes it sound like it takes you to a place like Vanishing Point, like just a point. And you're stuck there, like a real like place, like something pretty concrete. That's certainly the way it's described in Infinite Crisis. But it is interesting to think of the idea that if he's just kind of like brought into the Speed Force, not as someone that can access the Speed Force, that his perception of it is like being lost in time, being stuck somewhere, like in sort of relativistic hell, right? Where like time is passing at a different rate and shit like that. There's an argument that it's a different experience for him because he can't tap into it than it is for other people that spend time in the Speed Force. I think it's a tough question to answer, but generally, like Josh nailed the book's explanation of it. Is that he builds this armor, he siphons more energy into him until he's strong enough to get out. What does that mean? Who the fuck knows? Like, what does yellow sun energy have to do with Speed Force energy? Who the fuck knows? Like, that's the shit where it's like, Jake Garrick breathed in hard water vapor. He's fast now. Like, that, you kind of, at a certain point, you go, like, they gave us an explanation. You just kind of have to take it. Like, there's not a great necessarily like rationale scientifically, but that's the reasoning we're given in the event.
Because comic book.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Right. So that does it for Instagram. We are now headed over to Reddit.
Where everyone's nice and no one's ever mean.
Not once. All right. First question on Reddit from Draco Folly. Has there ever been a line-wide build-up to an event like Infinite Crisis before? Also, Infinite Crisis seems to get a lot of hate online. Why do you think that is?
First of all, I didn't read this when it came out. That was sort of in a gap when I wasn't keeping up. I like superheroes, but I wasn't keeping up with them. I wasn't reading new comics and stuff like that. It was
honestly before I got into comics. So yeah.
I came back to this later and read it, and I was just like, this is great. And I didn't go like, this is great. What did everyone else think? And like, I didn't go look it up. The idea, and it came up in a couple of the comments and questions that we got for this episode, the idea that like people didn't like Infinite Crisis was like a thought that hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't look it up in prep for this either because I didn't feel like looking up like 20-year-old reviews of a event because we're almost 20 years from Infinite Crisis. But I got to imagine part of it is, why does Crisis need a sequel? It was perfect. why are there so many books? I got to imagine part of it is like, why is there so much like mayhem and destruction? I think some of the criticisms of it were justified. Like I have seen some criticisms of the art. Certainly in terms of like some of the later issues and some of like the massive battles. Like I think timelines, stuff like that. There's stuff that got kind of like fixed for the trade collection that is like different in the issues, and some of it is like art getting finished, like getting re-inked or stuff like that. Like I think some of those things make a lot of sense. I got to imagine people had a general distaste for Superboy Prime to take who in Crisis is a very pure, very aspirational super adjacent character and then make him the villain and make him so violent and so maniacal, and like because he really like he doesn't do a parallax thing where he's like, but this is good for, he goes like, oh, this is fucking good for you. Like he's like lost his marbles. He's fully off the deep end. If he ever had a good motivation, it's like totally lost under rage and, you know, everything else that he has going on. I got to imagine there was a bad response to that from people being like, how could you possibly do this to Superman? He's essentially a Superman. He would never do this. You know, I got to imagine that's part of it. It surprises me though, because I think Infinite Crisis is great. To the first part of that, has there ever been such like a massive setup to an event? Because again, we had a 80-page one shot. Then we had 4 6-issue miniseries, each of which then also had a special. And then there was also a 7-issue Infinite Crisis thing. Plus, that's not even talking about all the tie-in issues of other things, you know. It's in Wonder Woman issues between Countdown to Infinite Crisis and Infinite Crisis #1, where she kills Maxwell Lord. That just happens in like Wonder Woman 217 or whatever the issue is. So there's all sorts of tie-ins, like line-wide for like a year and a half or whatever it was. They were like leading up to this event. Everything was going that way. In general, no, there's not things that really build up that way. Partly because I think they don't plan that far ahead. Partly because I think it just, we're talking about a scale of publishing that certainly right now DC is not really doing. You're not going to make 5 fully different books for an event. Like Death Metal frustrates me because it's got its main series and then just a bunch of fucking one shots, but really they're part of the story. You should just say that this event has 14 issues instead of that. But like the last event that had like a bunch of tie-ins that all kind of were their own thing, but they were connected, is Forever Evil.
That's what I was going to say, because you had that whole year buildup of Year of the Villain.
Well, Year of the Villain was part of Metal, but they did the Villains Month one shots with all the holographic covers, and that was the month that Forever Evil 1 came out. But leading up to that, they had Trinity Crisis, and that was running through Justice League Dark, Constantine, like Justice League of America. Like they had issues leading up to this Trinity War, which is like, let's not talk about it. And then that led right into Forever Evil. And then during Forever Evil, there was also Forever Evil Argus, Forever Evil Rogues Rebellion, Forever Evil Arkham War. And then Arkham War also had a special. That's probably the only other event, or the most recent event that had that many tie-ins. Final Crisis had a countdown series, and it had, you know, there was like Superman Beyond. There was there was a Rogues one for that too. There was Rage of the Red Lanterns. There was like
Legion of Three Worlds.
Like Final Crisis had a lot of tie-ins and a lot of stuff like that. It was a pretty big one. But again, most of that was like while it was happening. What's weird about Infinite Crisis is that they had 4 events that concluded before Infinite Crisis started, and they all fed in. It's certainly the biggest version of that I have any experience with. Probably, I mean, it's the biggest version of that. There are other things that do relatively wide publishing kind of stunts, but that's probably the biggest, most ambitious one. Next
question on Reddit from Diaper Gal Kate. How big is the Trinity in this? And should I take a read?
I mean, a lot of it kind of kicks off with the book itself, Infinite Crisis
Yeah.
itself, kind of kicks off with the Trinity.
Yeah, it starts and ends with it. They bookend it.
Yeah, you go for it. You just read
Oh,
this.
it's their storyline is kind of woven throughout. Wonder Woman, honestly, being the weakest of the three of them. Like Batman's through line throughout the whole thing is taking on OMAC. Superman, you've got his storyline as he's dealing with Kal-El and fighting him. But Wonder Woman kind of takes a back seat to all of it. But really, the Trinity, they're there, but I wouldn't say they are front and center. Like, especially if you're looking at the cover of the collected trade, like they don't take as big of a role as that cover makes it seem.
And I mean the issue is that they don't trust each other. That's where we kick off in the book, is we see them arguing. And again, like I've said, stuff has happened between Countdown to Infinite Crisis and this book. In Countdown to Infinite Crisis, we learn that Maxwell Lord, the longtime sort of like financier and whatever of Justice League International, has secretly been like working to destroy metahumans with this OMAC project. That OMAC project is tied to the Brother Eye satellite that Batman made to monitor metahumans. That it goes itself ties back to Identity Crisis and him not being able to trust anyone because he had his memories tampered with. In the Maxwell Lord kills Blue Beetle, kills Ted Kord in that one shot, gruesomely shoots him in the head. And then he mind controls Superman in various issues, and then Wonder Woman in whatever it is, 217, 214 issue of Wonder Woman, snaps his neck, but it's been televised. She doesn't know this, but she basically says, she has him in the lasso of truth, and she says, "How do I free Superman?" He says, "You don't." And she goes, "Okay." And she snaps his neck. Because like, if he's telling the truth, if I can't make him give up this, his control of Superman, I have to end it. She does that, and it gets televised, and she gets vilified for it or whatever. The OMAC thing is happening, and that's tied back to Batman. And when we get to Infinite Crisis, Superman is like, "You just need to fucking control everything, Bruce." And he's like, "That's not what it is." And Wonder Woman's like, "I have a thought." And they're like, "You're a fucking killer. No, thank you." And like, they're all fighting and they don't trust each other anymore. It's where we get this very harsh line from Batman where like Clark says, like, "I don't have to control everything like you do." And he's like, "You need to be more active. You can't just be fucking lofty like this. You could inspire people, but let's face it, the last time you inspired anyone is when you died." And they basically just go like, "We're done here." And they essentially like break up, like they're the Eagles or some shit like that. And we zoom out from that, and we see that in the Paradise Dimension, they're seeing that. They're watching the dark, what they perceive to be the darkness of this world. It's even broken up the Trinity. It's broken up the Justice League. Like, friendships can't survive on this earth. How could, like, we need to build reality on a better foundation. That's the whole impetus for Superboy Prime and for Kal-El, Earth 2 Kal-El, and for Alexander Luthor Jr. And we get that through the lens of the Trinity's relationship dissolving. And at the end of Infinite Crisis, they're on better terms with each other, but they don't come back. Batman's like, "I'm taking the Bat family. We're going on a trip." And Superman's like, "My powers haven't come back ever since I flew through that red sun. So I guess I'm retired for a bit." And Wonder Woman goes like, "I'm going back to Themyscira." and they kind of peace for a year. And then the whole line goes 1 year later. So if you were just reading Wonder Woman, she was back. But 52 was meant to fill in the gaps. So like, what happened in that year where they were gone? So the book starts with them breaking up and ends with them breaking up. And that's kind of the role they play in Infinite Crisis.
Yeah. And I mean, should you read it? Absolutely, I think you should. I think it's worth a read. Having just read it and did not read any of the tie-ins, I think you can get everything you need from the collected trade. Honestly, going back to the very first question of tonight, yes, Day of Vengeance is something that is mentioned, I would say, once a month on the show. But also so is Countdown. So is Countdown. I mean, Countdown is mentioned probably just as much. And as somebody who does the notes for every single episode, trust me, I know when it's one of the most frequently searched things in my computer. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that you need to read those. They're worth the read, but I don't know that you need to read them to read and appreciate and understand what's happening in Infinite Crisis. I think that's a fair statement.
I think it is. And I think this is partly why I like this event so much, is those tie-ins are great events on their own, more or less.
Yeah.
Some more than others. Day of Vengeance is great. I would say Villains United is probably the weakest as an event. They're great on their own. When you read Infinite Crisis, if you've read those, you go, that's where that happened. That's where this is, blah, blah, blah. If you don't read them and you read Infinite Crisis, you're not really missing it. They pretty much fill you in with what you need.
Yeah.
And ultimately in Infinite Crisis, you learn the role each of those four things plays. Villains United is the secret society has to fight the superheroes because I need certain people to plug into the Anti-Monitor Tower to bring back their old world. And then Ranthanagar Wars, I need to shift the center of the universe away from Oa. So we've moved a planet and it's set off this war or whatever. But I need that as part of the targeting of making a new multiverse. Day of Vengeance is by destroying the rules of magic, I'm creating an untamed raw energy source that will fuel my machine. And the OMAC project is these OMACs are fighting the heroes, and that's great for me. But really, I need Brother Eye, a sentient supercomputer, to run all the calculations I need to channel the magic energy to fire it at the new center of the universe to make the multiverse with the characters I plugged into the tower. So basically, each of those events has a role in Luthor's plan, but you don't have to read them. If you do, yeah. I think they're fun. I think they're worth it. But the book itself, Infinite Crisis itself, does a good job of kind of just going and this is where we are,
Yeah. And as I have proven, you can read it in a day. Or if you really want to take your time and soak it all up, turn it into a couple-day read. But yeah, Diaper Gallocade, I think you absolutely should give it a read.
Yeah, I mean, it's 7 issues. If you're just reading that, that's what, 40 minutes, really?
Yeah.
If you're not distracted, if you don't have other things going on.
Yeah.
If you're not busy working and not getting texts from someone can you record tonight?
We don't need to go into we don't need to peek behind the curtain. Well, all right, so that does it for Reddit. Now we're going to the
Oh shit. Oh fuck me.
And you're gonna look around again because that served you so well last time.
Hang on. Yeah, I gotta look at the movie thing here.
To the doc score.
Oh yeah. Oh, here we go. Thank you for ducks in my score.
All right.
Golden Girls? No.
Yes. Such a Blanche move.
I was worried that was a Rose move, but
it's a Blanche move. All right. First
heavens.
question.
Oh Lord, you're giving me the vapors. Ooh.
Oh, we're having some movement on this side of the call that really glad we can only see from the waist up.
Ooh,
there you go.
That's for the Patreon, baby.
That's for the Patreon. That's the $10 a month level. First question on the doc scored comes from Lilith. The main conflict leading into Infinite Crisis was distrust between the JLA, with many members breaking the unspoken rules of being a hero. Did Superman of New Earth actually do anything wrong, or was he just along for the ride?
Yeah, we talked about Batman with his ultimate fuck the superhero satellite that he loses control of because it gains sentience. We learn it gains sentience because Luthor grants it to Brother Eye. It's not totally Batman's fault, but he did make a satellite that like designed to target and monitor superheroes. He does that. Wonder Woman kills Maxwell Lord. What did Superman do? Why is Superman getting those harsh words from Batman? If I recall correctly, and you can correct me because you just reread this, I think it's that Batman feels like Superman's not proactive enough. Like it's that argument that we hear sometimes that Superman could do more, and Superman's like, I'm not a tyrant. I'm not gonna like run shit. I don't have to control shit the way you do. But Batman is kind of like, you don't do anything though. Like what good are you if you're up here, if you're not on the ground helping when bad shit is happening?
Yeah, so it's, Batman starts it off at the very beginning. Everyone looks up to you. They listen to you. If you tell them to fight, they'll fight. But they need to be inspired. And that's where Batman's coming at it from, is you're not inspiring people anymore. You're not leading them. And that's what Superman of Earth 2 gets onto him about later when they're having their standoff of, you could have done better. You could have inspired better. You could have led them to be better, but you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important at this point because we talked a lot about both Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor Jr., both of whom are in that Paradise Dimension, both of whom are like the villains of this event. Kal-El from Earth 2 is not a villain. He gets manipulated by Luthor for a bit, but he's still Superman. He's angry that this world is gone this dark way, but he's like, you guys, like, why can't you just be good? Like, why? Like, he's still Superman, and that's a big part of that conversation he has with New Earth Superman. Is just, he's like, what happened? Like, how are you not making this place better? Like, how could you let this happen? I think he feels betrayed, by that, the sacrifice they made. They lost their worlds and they have no place to live in this one. And for what? And I think he and Superboy Prime both feel that, but obviously he feels it in a more kind of altruistic, empathetic kind of way, where it's like, I would want you to have a better world. It's not even about me. I want you to have a better world. And Superboy Prime is like, this is wrong. I should have this. I could have had this, and then I would have made it perfect. And there's kind of two sides to how Superman could see it. And truly, I think New Earth Superman, I think the issue with him that Batman points out and that Earth 2 Superman points out is like, which one would this Superman agree with? Like, should he like take more ownership? Is he just disaffected? Like, what is it with this Superman where he's convinced himself to do less for a bunch of reasons, like he doesn't want to be a tyrant, all this kind of like a discussion that we have a lot when it comes to Superman as a character.
Yeah.
But he's also essentially talking himself out of being like a on the ground hero. Like, he's there to punch an asteroid or something, but where is he to inspire like everyday kindness and those kind of things? Ultimately, I don't know how much that argument holds up unless I'm really forgetting stuff that he did leading up. He's a little aloof to Ted during Countdown to Infinite Crisis, but everyone is. That's the point of that book. But like, yeah, I think in general, the argument is that Superman is maybe just a little aloof. He's maybe a little less proactive than he should be, a little less inspiring than he should be. But certainly on the scale of like sins of the Trinity, he takes a lot of flack for not having done that much wrong, like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I don't know that he did. And again, maybe it's because we weren't reading the weekly issues leading up to all this, and we weren't mired in the day to day. But yeah, I don't know that he did anything wrong, and he just kind of is along for the ride.
I mean, Countdown to Infinite Crisis gives you a relatively aloof look at Superman, but you're also like POV of Ted Kord. So it's hard to use that as evidence, because Superman shows up, and he's very kind, but he also goes like, well, tell me when you've solved this, and he just flies away. Like, if you just take that, I kind of buy what Batman's saying, but I don't know how much that was true generally.
Yeah.
I've read stuff from that era, but it's that piece of it doesn't really stand out. Certainly not in the concrete way that Wonder Woman's killing or Batman's distrust thing stand out.
All right. So next question from Yo Crow, with a couple random zeros thrown in, was Countdown to Infinite Crisis just a reason to replace Ted Kord's Blue Beetle with Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle? And which Beetle do you prefer?
I don't think it's just an excuse for that. I mean, here's the thing. It's 80 pages, and like I said, those 80 pages kind of weave you through the setups to all four of those lead-in events, those lead-in series. But you're following Ted Kord, and it starts with him just being like, "Oh, there's like money missing from my company," and then as he like unravels it, it's like, "Oh, someone's stockpiling kryptonite. Oh, there's like someone has like everyone's secret identity. Oh, something is like he's piecing it together, and it's a big conspiracy. He keeps going to people for help, and they won't help him. The only person that will help him is Booster, and Booster gets like orbital struck and like can't help. And you sort of see like a tonal reflection of what Infinite Crisis is going to deal with, which is like Ted comes from a happy-go-lucky kind of part of DC that is post-crisis. And so if you're going to make the argument that post-crisis is dark, you kind of have to attack the Bwaha League. You kind of have to get at the one thing that is like the big sore thumb of that theory. And what they do is they basically, no one takes him seriously. Batgirl won't help him. Batman like will not give him the time of day. Superman is like, okay, Ted, well, just let me know. Wonder Woman believes him, but kind of sloughs him off, says like, and I will help you later. Martian Manhunter says like, please don't bother me with this. I'm doing actual hero work. He has nowhere to turn. So he ends up going after Maxwell Lord himself in this castle in Switzerland. And he uncovers the whole thing himself, and he has no backup. And, he gets the shit kicked out of him and like his arm broken and stuff like that. And then Lord is like, you're going to join me? And he tells him to go to hell. And Max just shoots him in the head and kills him. And it's a very like inglorious end to a really beloved character. And from a meta perspective, next to Dick Grayson, if there was a character that you were going to like emotionally get people like, what the fuck? Why would you kill him? Certainly that way. Yeah. It's Ted Kord, he's from this happy-go-lucky era of the Justice League. It's maybe the most symbolic thing you could do to like kill joy in the post-crisis era is to kill Ted. You know? They played a lot, with the cover, like it was all obscured in that, like who is dead? Because the cover is like Batman holding a body or something like that. And then eventually they reveal that it's not just Shadow, he's holding Ted. I don't think it was only designed to get Ted out of the way for a new Blue Beetle. I do think it was designed to kill the happy corner of DC before an event that was all about there being no happy corner of DC.
Okay. So which do you prefer? Do you prefer Ted Kord? Do you prefer Jaime Reyes?
Ooh, it's tough. I mean, here's the thing. I like Ted Kord. I don't think he's as interesting a character as Jaime. And that's not to say he's not interesting at all. I think he is. I think there's good Ted stories. I like his relationship with Booster. I think there's a lot of fun there. I think there's a lot of like kind of pathos for that character. I really feel for him when he tries to do the right thing. And he is very smart, but people don't take him seriously because he wants to be underestimated. Like all of those kind of things. They touch on it in Countdown. They touch on it in or Countdown to Infinite Crisis, rather. They touch on it in like Blue and Gold and all sorts of other series. But I think generally Jaime Reyes is more interesting. He's a more interesting character. You get that kind of Spider-Man, like, oh, but I've got midterms, superheroing. You get the relationship to the Scarab, this alien thing. He's got to figure it out on his own. He's got cooler powers. I like Jaime better, but that's not to say I don't like Ted. But if I got to pick, I think I'd pick Jaime.
Yeah, Jaime is kind of the the fun of Spider-Man with the cool badass of Venom.
I
Right?
mean,
Like you've got
there's a little bit of that in there, and then there's also, that's another good example. I mean, it's also like it's aliens. Like you get some of the stuff you like about Green Lantern, even in with Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle. Like he's a really great character that they need to do more with. I mean, Graduation Day, Blue Beetle Graduation Day is coming, but they need to do more with him. But yeah, I probably like him better than Ted.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Only Just Dan Dunn again. What would the ramifications of killing off Nightwing have been if they had gone that route? Would it have been a better story?
Well, I think I've already said I don't think it makes as much sense as Connor dying, but I'd be curious what you think would happen. Like if Connor survived and Dick died, or maybe they both died, but let's just say Dick dies in Infinite Crisis. What do you see as like the knock-on effects of that through the things that we know happen after, like 52, etc. What do you think happens?
I don't know that Batman comes back from it. Like I mean that the era following A Lonely Place of Dying, right? Following Jason Todd's death, Batman flirted with that line. But there's always been that very clear delineation of, and even like throwing kind of Damian in with this too, like there's Dick and then there's the rest of them. Like Dick is a different thing for him. And so if Dick dies, like I don't know that Batman can come back from that. And there's that moment where Batman is standing, pointing the gun, and he goes, "You're right, it's not worth it." Had Dick been actually killed, does he pull the trigger? Is he so overcome at that point that he pulls the trigger? Like I think that's the first knock-on effect. Second, you look at the DC universe as a whole, and I don't know, maybe Martian Manhunter or Wally, but I don't know that there's another character that is as universally beloved and respected as Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
And I mean, you said you kill hope, you kill happiness, you kill Ted Kord. But if you really don't want there to be any light left, you kill Dick Grayson.
I mean, and I think that it ruins. I think you undermine Infinite Crisis if you kill him, because if the point is it's actually you didn't build the Earth on the wrong Earth. There's good here too. You can't kill Dick because then you're like, so it's gone. If we're using him as the example that Batman gives, that's like, is your Dick better? And he goes, no. And it's like, then you can't kill him. Like that's the whole point. I want to throw a theory out there. And I want to see what you think about this. You said you don't think Batman comes back from it. I agree, but I think it means different things.
Okay.
I have a theory, and I'm sure you can poke holes in this, but that Batman's grief reaction to the deaths of different proteges matches the protege. So Jason dies and Batman loses control, which was a frequent feature of Jason. When Tim dies during the Rebirth era, Batman, mourns him, but pretty stoically continues the mission. Tim's pretty mission focused. He'll put it at the expense of his relationships and stuff like that. When Damian died in the New 52, Batman becomes this like unstoppable. He has this unstoppable drive to undo it. He'll counter any enemy. He fights fucking Darkseid in a robot armor. Like he has the sort of like Damian's like stubborn, like will not stop until I accomplish the impossible sort of thing. And I think the way if Dick truly dies, because obviously we've seen him get injured. We've seen Batman's reactions to those things. But if Dick truly dies, I think he just gives up. I think he stops. He probably, maybe he pulls a trigger somewhere. Maybe he punches someone out, a big rage thing in the immediate aftermath. But long term, I think he just stops. Because Dick is his success story.
Dick is hope.
The other ones have, levels of success. He should be proud of all of them. But Dick is his success story. Because Dick has the same trajectory as him and comes out so much better.
Yeah.
And if Dick dies, I think that for Bruce ends the idea of Batman. Because if his worst case scenario is what happened to him, then Dick existing is, and look how that turned out. Great. Yeah. If Dick is gone, then it's, I think that's the end of Batman.
Yeah.
I don't know that this theory 100% holds weight, but I think you can kind of, if you selectively look at evidence, I think you can see a sort of pattern that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at it in my head. I'm playing back through right after Dick was shot in the head, before the Rick Grayson arc.
Well, yeah, because he like maims KG Beast and like leaves him on a mountain to die, basically.
Yeah, it's like it was. I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to make it nearly impossible for you to live.
Yeah,
and he just went off, just a different place mentally. And I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe he does give up. Maybe he loses that light. Maybe he just goes completely dark and never leaves his cave. I don't know. But I think no matter what route he goes, Dick dying is ultimately the end of Batman.
Yeah. Even if it's just spiritually, like the way he's fighting crime isn't the way Batman is meant to, or something. Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I don't know that it would have been a better story. I think Connor being the one made that story more meaningful.
I think it makes more sense from the Superboy Prime perspective. I also think it doesn't undermine the thing we're talking about Dick being this sort of symbol that it's like, no, you didn't build the Earth on the wrong thing. It's just different. But like, we can get out of the darkness. We still have good on our Earth.
Yeah. All right. Next question from the Marvelous Ryan. Second question. How do you feel about them making changes to the trade paperback version of the story? From art changes to adding and removing dialogue, they did change a bit.
Yeah. So some of them, like I said, is they went back and like finished some art. And I think that's mostly like Battle of Metropolis, kind of like these pages where there's like a million characters and they're all doing something. They went back and like re-inked, recolored, and like finished them off. They made some like dialogue fixes, like there's typos or like something gets misprinted. I think at one point Tempest talks about his daughter, but they have a son. It's just they used the wrong word. It had to go to print. They fixed. So there's some fix changes that happen in the trades. And that happens in general when they reissue things. They'll go back and be like, oh, fuck, we missed that. Let's put the punctuation in, or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There are some like dialogue changes that are just changes though. And some of it, I can't remember some of the specifics, but some of it is about more heavily implying that the multiverse survives. Like people saying they're getting pulled somewhere, ... Where in the original, they would just say like, whoop, they'd like disappear or whatever. But there's a little bit of like going back, like we always meant for the multiverse to be, like there's a little bit of that kind of thing. And there's some stuff too where some dialogue used to just be simpler, and then they actually kind of make it like a little clunkier. Like, what's the moment I'm thinking of? Wonder Woman's fighting someone. She says like, and I'm going to keep him down. And she's got her sword. And in the original, they go like, she goes like, what? I was just going to like pin him. And they go like, Mongol. Were you?
Yeah. It was during the Mongol fight.
And they're like, she was going to kill him. But when they change the dialogue, they make her be like, no, I was never going to like, there's a little bit more like of her explaining exactly how she wasn't going to kill him. Which I don't know, that kind of feels like a sort of cowardly thing. Like they were like, Wonder Woman wouldn't do that. And I like that in spirit. But the point of Infinite Crisis is they do not trust her. So you should put us in that seat as well. Even if we, heart of hearts, know the Maxwell Lord thing was a slip and she will never do it again. The point of the story is they don't trust her. So you should make it as ambiguous as possible, even if we know Diana wouldn't. And I think they just went back and did like some changes like that. I don't know what all of the changes were, but there's a few like tiers of them. Some of them are just fixes. Some of them are more like, the thing that happened later, we were thinking of it the whole time. There's some of that to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever read this trade paperback version of it, so I don't know. I can't speak to what has been changed or what was left the same.
And I have the issues. I don't have the trade. So everything I've ever like heard about the differences is just stuff I've encountered online on blogs or on Twitter or whatever.
Next question from First Mage. Does Maxwell Lord have a particular plan or ambition in life? Or does he gather power just to gather more power?
Yeah, so I mean, Max Lord he's the Black King of Checkmate. And he's using the Omax and Brother Eye to track and basically assault the superheroes. He's going to take them down. He has a line in Countdown to Infinite Crisis or something like that, that it's like he's evening the playing field, that like the Earth should be for people. Fully hypocritical, because he himself has psychic power, a power that he has been slowly augmenting over time to the point where he can mentally dominate Superman. But his stated objective is a sort of like, is sort of like the the age of men is over, the age of the orc has begun sort of thing with but with superheroes. But I think ultimately Max Lord just wants power. You know, like I think his stated objective is not necessarily his true one. I think it's ultimately it's about power. It's about it's about either being the only guy in the world with a power, or about holding a big enough gun to the heads of everyone that's left that they do what he wants, or he mentally dominates them. Like I think it's always about power with Max Lord.
Yeah.
And
Right. And last question from Trey Show. I've heard about a lot of people reevaluating Infinite Crisis as one of the best events. Was there any reason it didn't gain that status at the time? Is it the best Crisis?
Ooh, well, I mean, I've already said I'm baffled that people at the time like didn't love this. I think I can guess what the things are. I think we talked about them, what the gripes were. And it might even be down to like, why would you make Wonder Woman like just kill a guy like that, like in the lead up to it, stuff like that. I get it, that's fine. But my experience of it was I read it and I was like, holy fuck, this is just crazy. Like, this is really good. You see so many different characters, and that's the thing I always loved, especially as I was getting into comics. I know people give me shit about it all the time, but when I say like, if I was just going to hand someone a comic, I'd give them an event, because at least you'd see everyone. And then you go like, wait, who the fuck was that? And then you might look them up on the wiki, or you might like pursue like a cover that has them on it or something like that. Like, that was the thing I liked to do. I obviously have a very particular like mindset about lore and stuff like that too, but it's a thing I like about events is you usually get to see most people. And Infinite Crisis is certainly one of those books. Like, I love how sprawling it is, and seeing all these different things, and you're in space and you're back here, and there's time, and there's multiverse, and there's all this kind of cosmic shit happening. It baffles me that people wouldn't like that off the bat.
Okay,
do I think it's the best Crisis? Okay, no, you go.
Oh, I was another theory as to maybe why people weren't as jacked about it when it first came out is it broke up the Trinity.
Yeah,
I mean that's a big deal. I get that nothing in comics is ever permanent, right? Except what? Uncle Ben is always dead. I mean, that's really it at this point. But Like the Trinity, they broke them up. I mean, you have to know they're gonna come back together at some point, but still, just that, why are you breaking up the Beatles?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, Hal had just come back, but we were only just at the start of Jeff Johns bringing every Silver Age character back. So interestingly, at the time of Infinite Crisis, there were some permanent things. Barry had been gone for 20 years.
Yeah, Barry was gone. Bruce's parents were still dead.
Jason had been dead since Death in the Family. Like there were, Ted Kord just died, but that was very recent. But like there were some things that were relatively permanent. And actually, Ted Kord, the fact that he didn't come back until post Flashpoint is wild. Because a lot of those things get undone post Infinite Crisis. We're bringing back Barry. We do Blackest Night, everyone dies. Brightest Day, a bunch of people come back. Like there's all sorts of like ebbs and flows of that. But interestingly, at the time of Infinite Crisis, there were some just deaths. They were permanent. Yeah. And then the retcon punch kind of undoes some of that. We're sort of opening the gate. So maybe that's part of what people didn't like about it too. Is like, well, why the fuck is Barry there? Why is Jason back? Why is, what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
There's, Is it the best Crisis? I want you to go first.
Oh, that's not fair.
And let's say, just to do a kind of like master list here, crises that I would count as crises are Crisis on Infinite Earths, 0 Hour, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Flashpoint, Metal, Death Metal, and now Dark Crisis.
Fuck. Not fair. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's Flashpoint.
Interesting. As first?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think for me, it's a couple things. Flashpoint is a more Flash-centric story.
Obviously. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Infinite Crisis is a super family-centric story.
Yes, absolutely.
If you have to say it's one, right? And while I do love Superman, and I've been very open about how I have drifted more and more towards Superman over the last handful of years, Flash will always be my favorite. Like I'm always going to go Flash over everybody else.
Right.
And that lends me to Flashpoint. I also, for all of the criticisms and all the bad that came out of it, I like that Flashpoint coming out of that, they basically said, do whatever you want. This is it's a complete blank slate. Like, so much so that once Batman Incorporated ended, like you can finish this, but then nothing, we will establish as we go what stays and what goes and what's constant.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I think the big exceptions there are Batman and Green Lantern, which basically continue mostly unaltered from pre and post Flashpoint.
But I think there's a larger thing here of what is considered best and what is not. But if you're asking me, my personal, totally unbiased and objective opinion is Flashpoint.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm about to say something sacrilegious here, because truly nothing should take the place of the original Crisis.
That was the other thought that came to mind.
But I don't have as much fun reading the original Crisis as I do reading Infinite Crisis.
Sure.
Like the original Crisis is is one of those things like we talk about it sometimes with like problematic things where it's like historically significant, but we can move on. It's not that Crisis is problematic, but I think it's one of those things that's like historically significant. But if I'm being honest with myself, Infinite Crisis is better. I like it better. It's better written. It flows better. It's more dynamic. I like all the different corners of it. I love how it like uses all of the universe. I think Infinite Crisis is better. I'm going to say it's the best Crisis. Oh, fuck.
No. I mean, you're doing exactly what I did, because that was the same thing, same exercise I went through in my head was, I mean, I kind of have to say Crisis, but am I only saying Crisis because it's the one that wrote the rules on what a crisis is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, okay.
I think you're right.
But you're right. I enjoy Flashpoint more than I enjoy Crisis. And it's not that I don't like it, or it's not that I think it's bad or problematic or whatever it might be. I mean, it's George Perez at arguably his finest. And but there's just something about.
I think not having it at number one doesn't take away from how, impeccable it is, how stunning the art is, how landscape changing it is, any of those things. But I think, as you would want to be the case, Infinite Crisis takes the thing that got invented over here and then successfully, I believe, does a better job of it. I mean, theoretically, that should be what we want to happen every single time, is that the thing that came before should lead to something better. It's not always the case, of course, but this is me like, please don't hurt me.
No. Okay, so Infinite Crisis is the Empire Strikes Back to Crisis's New Hope. I mean, it's great, not taking anything away. Yeah, it just builds on it.
That's my perspective on it, and I'm being very, very honest there. But yeah, Infinite Crisis is the best Crisis. Come at me.
There you go. I'm sure they will. Well, that was the last question. So you know what time it is.
I'm not ready, but go for it.
Yeah. So now it's time for everybody's favorite game. Can you guess the name of the character based on how somebody who does not read comic books can describe that character to us? If you don't know how this game is played, I sent a photo of a DC character to my partner who does not read comic books, nor does she care for them. And she sent back some clues describing that character.
Oh, God.
Are you ready?
No. Oh, God.
Clue number 1. Sherlock Holmes vibes.
Detective Chimp.
Fuck you.
Yeah, baby. It's the Deer Stalker. Not many people wear the Deer Stalker. Yeah. Hell yeah, baby. Woo!
There you go. Detective Chimp.
What were the other clues, out of curiosity?
Is he compensating for something with that sword?
Sure, yeah. He's holding the Sword of Night. Yeah.
And Planet of the Apes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. If you didn't get it at that point, I was probably going to reach to the airwaves and just start slapping them. So
sure, yeah, fair enough. Well, thank you for lobbing me an easy one. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So that about does it for this week. You can send your questions in for next week's episode. What is next week's episode?
Next week's episode, again, we're doing things slightly out of order. This was going to be the December episode, but we're kind of just shifting the schedule around a little bit. Next week's episode, we're talking about, appropriately on the heels of this, we're talking about the work of Geoff Johns.
Perfect. Okay, so send your questions in for Geoff Johns, and we have Docmas coming up. So get those questions in for Docmas. Anything, everything, all of the above, DC related, not DC related, whatever you want to ask.
Totally.
Questions in for Lord of the Rings. Recording that at some point to release between Docmas and the new year.
Totally.
And you can send those questions into our Facebook,
Dr. DC Podcast.
Twitter.
At Dr. DC.
Instagram.
Dr. DC Podcast. I'm going to throw the new one out there. Hive. At Dr. DC.
There you go. Reddit.
r/Dr_DC.
We did not get one this week, but you can always send us an email.
That's right. It's drdcpodcast@gmail.com.
And we said Docness is coming up. What no better time than that than to send us a voicemail.
That's
you can
right.
Call us at
208-917-3238. It's 208-917-DCEU if you're nasty.
If you're nasty. Send us physical mail. Well, not me, but the Doc and Richard.
Give your address out. Go for it. Give your address out right now. Yeah.
Yes, it is 301 Hogue Street, Whitehorse, Yukon.
That's right. Y1A 1V8. You can send that to either Reed Vanier or Richard Eden or Josh Gill, I suppose.
Sure.
It's because we're not giving out his address. We know you weirdos would track him down. So
yeah, well, it is what it is. Also, if you like what we talk about here on Dr. DC, we have a whole other podcast.
That's right. Ghostfacers, a supernatural rewatch. We're going through every single episode of the CW Supernatural. We talk about real world monster lore, behind the scenes stuff about the show. It's a great time. We're like a third or almost halfway through season 6 right now, which is dope. Yeah.
And last but not least, Patreon, baby.
Yeah.
You heard it at the top of this episode. This week's episode was brought to you by the Golden Age patrons, where every month the Golden Age patrons get to vote on an episode topic. And we have a lot of fun. We got weekly readings, prescribed readings. We've got extra bonus content and videos. We've got an extra Patreon episode that comes out each week. So head on over to patreon.com and get signed up for that.
Oh, hell yeah. And, if money's tight. I get that. But for only $1, you can still join the Doc Squad. You can be part of our Discord community. It's a ton of fun in there. And here's a important shout out on Twitter, on Reddit, and in the Doc Squad. You can vote for the Docsners. It's a totally listener organized, fan voted award show. We did the first annual Docsners last year. There's all sorts of voting categories for comics, movies, TV, and the podcast itself. And so you can check out those categories and go place your votes. It's Docsners season for your consideration.
Yes, it is. All right. Well, that will do it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Doc, say good night.
Adios.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Adios.
All the superheroes, they always fight for what is right. Live with danger and adventure, they are men of might.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.